Hello, and welcome to Evolving Challenges of Unstructured Data in the Education Industry. Today's webinar is sponsored by Rubrik and Microsoft and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this special event. Now, before we get to today's great content, we do have a few housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in our webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to the questions during the live event, we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you ask. That Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be experiencing. A browser refresh is going to fix most audio or slide advancement issues, but if that doesn't work, just let us know in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. Second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources, and I'd especially like to call your attention to 4 links from Rubrik. There's one to book a one-on-one chat with one of our presenters. There's information on zero trust data security for higher education and on safeguarding data assets for higher education. And there's a link about the Rubrik winter release, which takes place tomorrow. So this is a very timely event. Also in there, you'll find some Actual Tech Media links like our Gorilla Guide Book Club and the Event Center, which has information in a calendar for upcoming events from us. So I encourage you to access those resources now and share them with your friends and colleagues. At the end of this webinar event, we'll also be awarding a $300 Visa gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. Official terms and conditions can also be found in your handout section at the bottom. Finally, one of the best benefits of this event is the opportunity to ask a question of our expert presenters. So to help encourage your questions, we have a very special additional prize for you. That's another Visa gift card, this one for $50 for the best question. So at the end of the event, we'll look at all the questions that came in, pick out the very best one, and contact that prize winner. And with that, let's get to today's fantastic content. So it's my pleasure to introduce our presenters today. We have Eric Hanna, who's a solution specialist for unstructured data at Rubrik, and Connie Eaton, who's account technology strategist at Microsoft. So Connie and Eric, thanks for joining us today and welcome.
Hi.
Thank you, Scott.
Well, we're really looking forward to this presentation, so I'll turn things over to Connie to take it away.
Hi, friends. My name is Connie. I'm an account technology strategist here at Microsoft. I work exclusively with education accounts, mostly in the kind of Pennsylvania and Maryland area. We have been talking with Rubrik, who we have this great partnership with, about different successes that we've had in education here, kind of on the eastern half of the country, especially around like M365 data and Teams data, people that are really interested in making sure that that is kind of secure for them. And we just thought about having a broader conversation about that unstructured data challenge in education. And Eric is really the expert on that. So I'm mostly here for color commentary, but just to introduce Eric. Eric, turning it over to you.
Connie, no, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. And we absolutely have. So a little bit on my role. I work with our customers on solving unstructured data challenges. And I've worked with numerous higher education customers supporting, and we'll get into all different types of file and unstructured data and the challenges associated with them. But it's certainly a growing problem and a growing challenge. So I certainly appreciate the introduction, Connie. The slides just kind of, I'm going backwards. Hold on 1 second. There we go. Thank you. Connie, did you do that? That was great. And I don't know how you did it because it was already at the end. I was like, how do we end so fast? I did want to start with the relationship that Rubrik has established with Microsoft. It's a very tight-knit partnership. We've done a lot of co-engineering. And of course, when we talk about unstructured data today, we're going to talk about leveraging Azure and storage in Azure for file and unstructured data in both the data protection space and migration and moving unstructured data to the cloud. And due to this relationship, we've been able to collaborate and work together to solve a lot of common challenges for our customers. And one of the things I wanted to highlight was one of the successes right out of the gate. So I wanted to highlight Worcester Polytechnical Institute. It's a higher education research organization here in Western Massachusetts, one of the biggest research organizations in New England, where establishing biomedical research, biosciences research. They do research on economies and economic data, so they're constantly gathering a ton of data. It was so imperative for them to deliver a good data service, mainly to academic research. And part of their strategy was delivering data storage, but also data protection and scalability and performance. And their main goal was to leverage the cloud further and leverage the cloud for both data protection, for backup, for archival, but also for future workloads where the cloud made sense. And we were able to work with them between Rubrik and Azure to move a lot of their on-premise data protection and data movement from the data center to their Azure storage buckets. And we'll talk more about this use case as we go. So what is the challenge? Where are we seeing this in higher education? With the universities I've worked with, there's all different types of file and unstructured data. Mainly, and the most common one is around academic research or research and research grants. For any university where you're providing researchers or staff or faculty or principal investigators a lab or a facility to do research, generate data, analyze that data, come up with results and findings. This is all very critical to many universities. It's how a lot of them get funding. And because of really the academic workflow of research, we're seeing things like scientific instruments come into the university. We're seeing video cameras for one of my university customers was doing an autism study and was taking videos to understand the behaviors of children with autism. And all of a sudden, this puts a tax on IT because the data footprint just continues to grow and grow and grow. And a lot of universities are growing into petabytes of data and billions of files. And it goes beyond research. It goes into athletics for some universities. It goes into video surveillance for campus police. There's so many different types. Connie, you and I have talked about this, right? It's all of a sudden this haystack continues to grow. You see this with your customers, right? Microsoft is talking to the universities that they support and seeing this challenge, correct?
Yeah, I don't think a day goes by that I don't have some conversation with someone at a university about what they're seeing for data now, and then what it's going to be a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now. It's pretty much universal. They're expecting growth, especially on the research side, as you mentioned. I guess the other thing is that when you think about it, to a large extent, universities that have like a physical footprint are kind of like a small city. And so they have data that's pretty much, they have health data, they have security data, they have research data, because they have all of these other functions. And so it is massively unstructured because they're doing a little bit of everything that you need to do to support a population of people.
It's so true. And funny enough, outside of higher ed, we'll work with media and entertainment, we'll work with hospitals, we'll work with different verticals, but a university sometimes has a bit of everything because of the different colleges or different departments that they support. And it just, it becomes a challenge, and it's daunting to think what's going to happen in 3 years as my data just continues to scale. And one of the biggest challenges that they face is not just supporting the scalability of data, but one of the things that's more or less evolved in this space too, and in every space is, back in the 90s and 2000s, we had this concept and needed it to deliver on the concept of operational recovery. A user deletes a file. There's a data loss event where we have to recover a file or folder and get that data back from an operational day-to-day perspective. And then there was the concern around what happens if the power goes out? What happens if our data center gets flooded? If there's some sort of disaster, right? If we're in a hurricane zone, how do we evacuate, from our data center and have a disaster recovery plan? And sometimes there was this creation of, okay, we need a redundancy or duplicate copies of our data somewhere for disaster purposes. And that was almost pretty infrequent. Like there was a risk, but the risk was nominal. But now in today's age, there's a new risk, and that's cyber threats and cyber recovery. So being able to provide and support massive scales of unstructured data to both operational and disaster and now cyber recovery becomes an even bigger headache, because what we're seeing from a university perspective is, and from an unstructured data perspective is, it's an attack vector. It is where attackers are focused. It was a very sad story to see one of the Illinois colleges. They were hit with ransomware at a very untimely moment where COVID, COVID had struck, and students and faculty were working from home, and the campus had to close. Now, that's probably the most extreme example with an unfortunate circumstance of being attacked by a cyber threat, struggling to recover and keep up with COVID and remote learning, that really had the most detrimental impact, and that was shutting down. But we're seeing this increase of threats to higher education as well, and specifically academic research. Research is key. It is intellectual property of the university. So what do we typically see in the IT world? A lot of our customers are struggling to keep up with the data growth and deliver on all of these recovery needs that their customers, their departments then have. And so one of the common approaches has been just continuously adding on-premise data center storage and data center footprint. And this has been good for operational recovery for many customers. Yes, I can restore files, folders. I can fail over my systems. But where we've seen limitations is in the cyber recovery areas, to be able to restore from previous points in time, or achieve immutability, and most importantly, separate a copy of their data outside of their production environment. And so when you look at traditional backup and recovery solutions, keeping up with this data at scale becomes very, very challenging. I have to have a full-time employee, sometimes two, maybe three, to run all of the data protection jobs to keep up with the data growth. I'm facing slow speeds. I'm managing backup jobs. I'm not getting backups done in the window that I'm required to for my customers. And so that becomes a real burden on cost and expenses to try to keep up with the service levels. And then folks have looked to the cloud to understand, is there a way that we can leverage Azure? Can we leverage our cloud investment and invest more in the cloud to support our storage growth, or offload our backup and recovery, or maybe archive data out to? In today's technologies don't give us a ton of options in leveraging Azure and leveraging it effectively and in a cost-effective manner. And this is really where we've seen the partnership with Rubrik and Microsoft really sort of flourish, because this pain of unbound data growth and the challenges of keeping up with operational recovery, disaster recovery, and now most importantly, cyber recovery, and a desire to leverage the cloud, Rubrik has a solution to provide our customers the ability to back up, archive, and leverage the cloud extremely effectively. When it comes to writing to Azure, we can write to all file data to Azure Hot, Azure Cool, or Azure Archive Storage. We can align service levels based on the data value or data age to leverage Azure buckets and Azure storage effectively. What you're seeing here is a virtual appliance, a software from Rubrik that acts as a backup and recovery solution, and also can be a data movement engine for even migration, or again, archive, and moving large data sets and perhaps old data sets to the cloud. And this is a lot of what our customers look for. So on top of just leveraging our Microsoft Azure environment to support our data growth, support our data protection, support our cyber recovery strategy. We're increasing our security posture with a Rubrik and Azure solution. We're simplifying data protection. We eliminate a lot of the complexity in keeping up with billions of files and petabytes of data and this unbound data growth. We are able to manage cost, right? There are different tiers of Azure storage for different requirements and different needs. We allow, as a partner to Microsoft, our customers to use Rubrik and back up, archive, or migrate data to the appropriate tier for the appropriate cost at the appropriate service level. And this has been transformational, really, for our customers, helping them accelerate their cloud adoption journey with Microsoft. And as a data protection engine from a Rubrik perspective, this is a more modern and uniquely built engine for protecting file. To not get too technical, it is a proprietary built file system. It's an NFS and SMB stack, a Windows and Linux file system that is built and optimized to move data as fast as the environment allows us. One of the examples that we mentioned, Worcester Polytech. They had about 1.5 petabytes of file data on Isilon, and their goal was to go to Azure. And they actually decommissioned their DR storage. They repurposed 2 nodes into production and decommissioned 2, and moved their entire backup and disaster recovery process to Azure storage. And that was a huge cost savings for them. It allowed them more scalability on premise, but also allowed them to scale their environment with Microsoft to support data protection and cyber recovery. But when you look at 1.5 petabytes, or maybe up to 5 petabytes, maybe you have 20, 30, 40 petabytes, a single virtual appliance from Rubrik can handle the movement, the scanning, the indexing, and movement of up to 4 to 5 petabytes per virtual machine. And we can deploy multiple virtual machines to handle any scale of workload. So when you look at the migration or the movement or the backup and archive of data, or just general data movement, being able to move as fast as the environment allows is a unique proposition that Rubrik brings with to our Microsoft customers to manage and protect large data sets and do so to Azure. Connie, I did want to ask you too, as you're engaged with your customers, the mission to leverage the cloud, right? And maybe there are some blockers or challenges, and we're talking about kind of breaking down those barriers. But you must talk to and have conversations with folks all the time about how do we leverage Azure better? What do people usually look for? What is their top asks of moving into Azure?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we help a lot of folks. So people are at all different levels of maturity for Azure when it comes to universities. And so for some folks, when we're talking to them, it's just about, how do I get started? What's a good kind of starting thing for cloud? I think, and that ends up being a lot of data and virtual desktops. That's the place where we spend a lot of time helping folks just kind of get things started. I will say that as universities or institutions get into a higher level of maturity, they are looking at business continuity plans that they decided on 5 years ago. And those business continuity plans really revolved around the data center that they have across town or 6 blocks away. And leaders are not as sort of sanguine on that as a great BC strategy anymore. And so that's another really easy entry point for folks into Azure because it has immediate business value. Now you have your data in another geolocated area that's not the city that you're in, right? Right. So that's another really great place where I think it's another really good kind of starting position for folks that are looking to Azure that is a little bit more sort of top down, I would say, than people want to use the cool new stuff because you do kind of get this on all sides, right?
Yeah, and I'd agree with you. From customers who are fully on premise today and just kind of dipping their toes in the cloud, it's like, okay, archive or backup and long-term retention. Maybe their grants have certain retention requirements. If they're doing research, they need to store that data for 5 years or 10 years. I've seen with one university. Okay, going to Azure and having the low-cost storage options of Azure is a great dipping the toe use case. But we're also working with more mature clients, you're absolutely right, who have maybe moved the business continuity and the recovery operations out to the cloud. But now they're also starting to look at, what sort of production workloads, what sort of file storage can I provision and deliver as a service as my customers need, right, from Azure, right? And even in that environment, we're partnered to be able to help, Azure files be protected within Azure or from, one Azure site to another Azure site to be geo separate, right? So you're absolutely right. We see the same thing. Everyone's on a different cloud journey, and there are great ways to start to adopt or really accelerate your adoption of Azure and what you can do. I'll say this too. I mean, in the unstructured data world, this is a fascinating market to me because it's never going to stop growing. I was just reading an article the other day. It's a $20 billion industry of file data storage. It's supposed to grow to 90 billion, which means we're going to have just all of this data, more and more data, and universities are going to be one of these verticals that just continues to generate it. Understanding the data, understanding the value is most critical in determining a few different things. How do you manage your storage? How do you protect your data effectively and deliver on the service levels? But in the event of any of those operations, a operational recovery, a disaster recovery, or a cyber event where you have to recover, understanding what data is valuable to your, I call them business units, but your users, your departments, the customers that you're supporting is also extremely critical in those moments. So with the Rubrik solution, when you're looking at your unstructured data, we're also providing you the ability to understand your data by age, by access time, by modified time across your global file or unstructured data environment. So that, as we talked about, if you're just dipping your toe into what do I take to the cloud, we can help you identify, here's data that's 5 years old. This researcher, this PI is no longer here. Here's surveillance video we have from 3 years ago that's really not relevant to the police department or the campus police anymore. We could maybe move that data out of where it is and move it to the cloud, right? And drive economies and lower cost of ownership for our IT department. And that will be a big value as we continue to see this unbound growth of unstructured data. There's one other kind of reference I'll wrap up with, and this was a more recent customer we brought on here at Rubrik and Microsoft, and this was Thomas Jefferson University, and it's both the university and the university health system. So part of their hospital division that actually delivers healthcare services. And we ended up protecting both PACS data, medical imaging data, along with some of the academic and research data of the university side. And while data protection and cyber recovery and cyber protection was a big driver for them, it was also getting out of the data center and understanding that they have multiple petabytes of file data. And they shared this quote with us, the data discover capability, helping us prioritize, and change the way we look at data and change the way we service our departments was very valuable to them. It was a kind of a secondary value that just said it's changed the game for us and how we support, and more importantly, how we communicate with those customers that we serve. So Michael's been great to us. He's been great to work with. His team's unbelievable at Thomas Jefferson University. And I know they're now a big Azure consumption customer as well, because they're consuming petabytes for backup and archive workflows of their unstructured data to Azure, and leveraging, I know, the immutability components of the Azure storage buckets to secure their data and their medical data from cyber threats with Rubrik and Azure storage buckets. Connie, I want to. Is there anything I missed? I wanted to kind of toss it over to you if there's anything you wanted to add or anything that kind of struck a chord with you as we were going through today.
I think that, we talked a lot about research and research data, and I do think that that is a place where IT can really lean in and help researchers. I think that, kind of data management plans and all of that kind of stuff is a place where it does benefit IT to kind of lean in a little more than maybe researchers don't always want to talk to IT. I worked in IT for a long time at a university. They don't always want to talk to us. But like when we start talking about this stuff, this is where they really need the help. And so I would say that is research data is an especially big challenge that I think many universities are trying to figure out how to grapple with. Because it is a thing that researchers know they need to deal with, but it's sort of not a thing that's, not high on their list, right? That they want someone else to think about that one. And so this is a great solution for those folks in IT that are just trying to help, but need to make it easy for these folks to get what they need so that they can really focus on their research. Their job is, finding out new stuff, saving lives, doing, cool research.
Right. It's so funny you mentioned that because, in working with the IT departments of these universities, I'm finding that most research departments have like a liaison from the lab or from the research department to work with IT. And I found from an IT perspective, it's like sometimes research is the most difficult customer I have because they have these demands. But the goal, to your point, the goal of it being seamless and easy for them. We didn't get too deep in the technology on the Rubrik side, but being able to set policies that meet the, align to the criteria of a grant or a researcher or a PI that says, hey, I'm going to be gathering this data from this electron microscope or this sequencer or this mass spectrometer, or, I'm doing geospatial imaging on this land and we need to gather all this data and I need to retain it for X. Like, IT can just set that up and deliver that for each individual researcher customer that they have. And that's very critical, right? Leveraging Azure storage to be able to do that. It makes it kind of scalable and seamless and doing so with Rubrik, which is great. But you're right. They're a tough customer, but they're a tough customer because they're bringing good revenue to the university for grants and funding, which is very key.
Yeah, the stakes are really high for those folks.
They are, yeah. And one thing that's interesting, a lot of IT folks too, as we talk through it, we're like, this is intellectual property of the university, right? If they are doing the research under the campus, under the university environment, this data, these results at the end of the day become critical data that the university is responsible for protecting and will stay with the university. So always very critical to protect research for sure. And really, that's it from an overview perspective. There's, I did mention the partnership that we're seeing between Microsoft and Rubrik to solve this challenge. This is a big challenge. It's a big data challenge, and I think there's a constant struggle to support customers. For IT to support their customers in the university space because of this. And so there's a few different action items that we can take, and that if you're interested, by all means, please reach out. But there's a one-on-one discussion to dive deeper into the joint solution of Rubrik and Microsoft. We have a webinar coming up. I think Scott mentioned it. It's tomorrow, and what's important about our winter release is we're announcing more and more updates and product updates and features, especially around both data security and our integrations with Microsoft in the cloud. And of course, there's a QR code there for more educational resources. So Scott, I don't know if there was anything else. I didn't know if you needed me to cover that slide or if we were supposed to, but I'll turn it back to you if there are any questions.
That's great. And I'll just say too about this slide, if you have any difficulty with the QR codes, all of these items are also links in your handouts section area too, so you can get them there as well. So that was a great discussion. I mean, just to appreciate all those concrete examples, but about like what's happening with research data and the ransomware attacks, and also just the the evolution of people's thinking about disaster recovery and having sort of those data centers across town, and getting beyond that that phase. But we do have some questions coming in here. In the first one, I think I'll direct to Eric. They're asking, can the Rubrik solution help us migrate or move our file shares to Azure?
Yeah, a great question. And I tried to hit on that a little bit as well. So yes, the Rubrik solution is a data protection solution at a core. It's designed to back up, encrypt, and secure data to any storage target. In this case, we're seeing a lot of movement to Azure buckets, and any bucket within Azure from a hot core archive perspective. But also, there is a capability in the technology to take a Windows or Linux file system on premise and migrate it, keeping ACLs and permissions intact with the data and migrating it to, say, Azure files, right? Or to a NFS and SMB storage services in Microsoft Azure. And we're starting to see more advanced customers or advanced users of Microsoft Azure do that, right? Move production file systems to Azure. So short answer, yes, it absolutely can do migration as well.
Okay, great. This next question comes from Warren, who's asking, we have an issue with data governance. We need to be more aware of protecting data. Do you have any insights on how to do that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The things I see around data governance is around understanding the data, right? Applying policies based on the type of data. So one thing that is coming out with this Rubrik technology, we actually have it as part of the Rubrik suite today. It's being built into this software, and that is the ability to, as we back up data, open the file and scan for, we call it sensitive data discovery. So identifying, is there data that needs to be governed based on it having certain PII data or PHI data, and then protected and maybe secured in a certain way. So out of the box, we're about 2 to 3 months down the road from having that integrated into the Rubrik product. It's actually going to be integrated to the Rubrik to Azure product as well. So being able to identify what's in my data, right? I have a large data footprint. What's actually in these files, and how do I protect the data to the type of data, the sensitive data that it is? That feature will be enabled in the next few months with Rubrik.
Okay.
Well, and outside of the technology, I feel like when you're talking about data governance, there's always this underpinning of who is the owner of this data, or who is what does the data governance committee have to say about that? Who is the person in the institution or in the university that kind of decides how that data does need to be governed? And sometimes at a university, we have to help those folks understand what the kind of stakes are and what the options are. So there's some sort of, there's sort of the technical side, and there's kind of the human side for data governance, just high level.
Okay, super. Next question here. They're asking, what are some tools available to analyze unstructured data? What are some techniques used to address the challenges with unstructured text and images? So I guess I'll kick that to Eric first, since you've got unstructured data in your title, and then maybe Connie might have some thoughts just from an Azure perspective as well.
Yeah, I think it seems kind of like a general question, and I'm trying to figure out if there's a specific answer. But what are some techniques used to address challenges? And I'm trying to decipher what the specific challenges may be. I'll say this: one of the more valuable proprietary technologies within Rubrik is our scan engine. Unstructured data challenges is like when you have some of the biggest challenges are, people have billions of text files, right? A very dense file system, which means it's not very capacity intensive, but it has billions of tiny files in it. And that's really hard for a lot of technologies to understand and then scan and then back up. And I'll say this, whether it's large image files or very dense, text files or small files, our proprietary scan engine was built to parse through that data very effectively. We have scan rates upwards of like 400,000 files per second. So it's built to handle both scanning, indexing, and moving these very dense small file systems, and then some of the largest image files. We've done this for genomic sequencing instruments that take massive images and videos, and media and entertainment that takes large 8K videos. As far as episodes used to be a few gigabytes, now they're like 3 terabytes, 4 terabytes an episode because of the size of these components to media files. Protecting that data with legacy technologies has been kind of a challenge. When we scan it, one, we can most importantly scan the data and then back it up, but two, you get visibility into the data by age as far as its access, its modified time. And then from a further analysis, as we index data, we actually index all of the metadata of the files. So if it's a text file, if it's a large image file, you'll be able to, when you search the index to find data that may be very dense or maybe very large, you're able to search on those sort of parameters because we'll have gathered all of the metadata, and we can do things like tagging and some other features around understanding the unstructured data. But one of the most critical things is understanding data by age, right? By access time, by modified time, if it's valuable to your customers that you're supporting. I hope that answered the question. It's a good ask, and I think there's a few different ways to answer it.
Okay, sounds good. Connie, did you want to add anything to that from the?
No, that's 100% Eric's wheelhouse.
Okay, all right, great. The next question is, if I need to restore data from Azure, how do I search in Rubrik to find that data in Azure?
Yeah, good. So try to keep this one a little more concise. As I mentioned, part of the Rubrik technology is to scan the file system, index it, and back it up. And one of the things, actually, let me do this. I'm going to pull this up if you guys can see this okay. Why this is very valuable for going to Azure, right? If we're backing up petabytes or archiving old data to Azure storage, the index is not stored in the virtual machine. It's actually stored in the Rubrik Security Cloud as a purpose-built environment for every individual customer. It's encrypted and only provided access to our customers. This index allows you to scale it to trillions of objects. So when you go to search and go find data in the cloud, you're just searching against the index, which is a cost-favorable operation versus reaching out to the cloud and finding all the data in the cloud. So you'll be able to search the index, identify where your data is in your Azure buckets, and execute a restore or rehydration operation from that index. It's a very smooth and fast process for the billions of files and petabytes of data. That's one of the biggest challenges a lot of our customers tell us is like, I have to find a needle in this massive haystack. Having the index that we have being hosted and secured and the search being executed against that index is very crucial.
Okay.
Yeah,
super.
Good question. Yep.
Another question here, they're asking, are there cost benefits in using Rubrik to protect or move data to Azure?
I think the biggest thing is the ability to write to the hot tier, the cool tier, or the archive tier directly, right? One of the bigger challenges we've seen with storage technologies and legacy backup vendors is like writing to a performant tier and leveraging, Azure tiering or some sort of policy in the cloud. Not to take away from that value proposition that exists in the cloud, but for a lower cost of, backup and archive and the workflows we kind of talked about with large data sets, being able to write to Azure Archive and keep data there for 5 or 7, compliant type retentions becomes a massive cost savings because of the cost difference between the storage tiers. And then furthermore, that search operation that was actually just asked right? There are certain things that avoid costs as far as restore and touching files really in the cloud. And in the design of the software, when you have very dense or very large files, file grouping is very critical as well, right? Grouping into large blobs and writing that as a blob, right? Putting 1,000 files into one blob, writing it to the Azure bucket also drives a lower cost of leveraging the cloud. And these are all things that, this technology from Rubrik was built with in mind. Like we had this in mind when the technology was being built to help customers leverage the cloud more cost effectively. So those are just three of the examples of driving and controlling costs in moving to the cloud. Oh, one other I wanted to add there. One other I wanted to add there too, real quick. Incremental forever, right? Probably the most common challenge is if I have a petabyte of data, most technologies cannot do incremental forever. They have to reset their index or redo a full backup of the data, and it consumes a lot of storage. And it can duplicate, triplicate, or exponentially grow the backend storage for backup and recovery. And so the design of the Rubrik solution to take a petabyte, compress it down, and incrementally protect new data forever moving forward, you're only going to see about a petabyte of data in the backend versus maybe 6 or 7 petabytes in the backend when it comes to operating data protection services to the cloud.
Okay. Well, Eric and Connie, I think that's probably a good place to leave it. This has been a great discussion, and really appreciate you guys bringing us up to speed on what's going on with Rubrik and Microsoft, and on the Azure side specifically. So, thanks a lot for being here. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. All right, and with that, I do want to just remind everybody that the about these links again, the QR codes here, and I'll leave those up during the prize drawing, so you can grab those if you'd like, or of course you can get them from the handout section if you're having any difficulty recognizing the QR codes. So it is time for our Visa gift card prize drawing, and the winner of that $300 Visa gift card today is Natasha Hawkins from Texas. So congratulations to Natasha. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Rubrik and Microsoft for making this event possible. And thanks as always for attending and for your great questions. That concludes today's event. Have a great rest of your day.